Mew, the first Pokemon, but only first in one definition, because we could also be talking about Rhydon or Bulbasaur or Arceus, but nevertheless the progenitor of all modern Pokemon and the missing link. As one of the first legendaries, this thing's had countless classic appearances. Mew is technically also one of the first secret Pokemon from the original games, which every kid back then was trying to get, desperately using HMs on that random truck near SS Anne. And then the kids who actually use the internet most likely used the famous Mew glitch. Gotta love Gen 1, right? Mew's got tricks aplenty up its sleeve. In fact, it's living proof that the phrase old dogs can't learn new tricks is hopelessly outdated. Old cats, old Mews, you get it. Without any further ado, how good was Mew actually? And in the following video, we'll be covering these competitive formats. And yes, that's right, Mew has never been allowed in VGC, so we're limited to singles here. Let's get the basics out of the way. Mew is the first ever mythical Pokemon, which basically means event legendaries. Mew also kicked off a subset of mythical Pokemon that have base 100 stats all around. But there's something unique about Mew's DNA, or maybe the opposite of unique. As the first Pokemon, Mew is capable of learning every TM, HM, and move tutor move, except for stuff like Draco Meteor and Secret Sword. With 100 base stats and nearly every move, the only thing that pins Mew down is its psychic typing. In Generation 1, that mind-blowing stat faltered against Mewtwo's qualities of just being better. Sure, you could run Mega Drain, Fire Blast, Soft-Boiled, Horn Drill Mew, but it couldn't quite stack up to Mewtwo's raw power, especially with Amnesia, one of the moves Mew didn't have access to. Nevertheless, the fact that Mew could spec however it wanted made it a formidable foe. The most common set was actually physical, owed to Mew's access to everything it needed. After a Swords Dance, you had your choice of Earthquake, Hyper Beam, or Explosion to wreak havoc, or you could just employ one of the most reliable recovery moves ever in the game, Soft Boiled, to stay healthy. Of course, you could also go special if you want. With Thunderbolt, Blizzard, and Psychic, Mew had perfect coverage and a healthy dose of power behind it, but the lack of a setup threat meant the physical set was the way to go. Support options were lacking in Generation 1, so it was most common to see one of these two sets. But of course, there was always the possibility of Thunder Wave, Transform, Counter, Reflect. Listen, there was a chance of anything, really. It's here that we need to make something clear. While there are worlds of Mew sets it could run and be successful with, we're only focusing on the sets that actually made a splash in the metagame. Because if we didn't, we'd be here long enough for 7 more generations of games to come out. So with that said, Mew's unpredictability made it near impossible to counter. Mewtwo was probably the best option because it straight up outclassed it, but it still had to be afraid of Swords Dance and Explosion unless it was running Barrier. Just like with Mewtwo, the best way to counter an uncounterable Pokemon was to status it, especially Sleep. However many different options you might have, they're just dreams in Sleep. Mew and Mewtwo were the only two Pokemon in Ubers, and while Mew didn't quite have Mewtwo's all-consuming power, it certainly came close through raw versatility. With Amnesia forgotten, Mew became the best setup sweeper in the game come Generation 2, thanks to its continued access to Swords Dance. While Mewtwo, Lugia, and Ho-Oh were left repeatedly cursing to attempt a sweep and Celebi had no boosting move to speak of, Mew was capable of outstripping its competition with the Swords Dance and then hitting its opposition where it hurt. Shadow Ball hit every Uber except for Ho-Oh super effectively, which always feared a Rock Slide. Mew proves that it's a real sucker for eggs by keeping Soft Boiled in play, and Submission is there to blast through everything else. While Mew's other options existed, they were all less powerful than its physical set. Earthquake or Explosion were options, but lacked the coverage necessary, and with Swords Dance and Soft Boiled paired, Mew could afford to have less than stellar coverage. You could always pack a Psychic or Fire Blast in case you were afraid of a specific Pokemon like Heracross, which was the best counter to the standard sweeper set due to its resistance to submission and hugely powerful Mega Horn. Gen 2 EVs meant every Mew had no fear of packing in backup plans just in case, meaning there were, once again, no counters. Curse, Counter, and Thunder Wave also appeared, but the simple truth was that beating this physical set was incredibly hard for most Pokemon. What's more, in Generation 2, the moves were still fairly limited, so Mew had other options, yes, but was there really anything more synergistic than simply setting up and tearing through? Not really. At this point, Mew's base stats still outclassed 90% of the Pokemon in the game, so going the route of Sweeper made by far the most sense. Here, it's not versatility that made it the best, it was simply access. Nothing else with stats like Mew had access to a set like it had. With Gen 3, that was no longer true. Groudon, Kyogre, Deoxys, and the Laddies all far outstripped Mew in terms of attacking stats. But what really put a hamper on Mew's effectiveness was the overall widening of move pools. Suddenly, every Uber got Calm Mind or Swords Dance, and Groudon and Kyogre even set up for themselves with Drought and Drizzle. And most damning for Mew, Mewtwo was back in business as both a physical and a special sweeper thanks to Bulk Up and Calm Mind. Mew had 3 variants of pure special attacking sets. All of them made use of Soft Boiled, and they frequently incorporated Bolt Beam as well for coverage. Pure special Mewtwo with no setup had good coverage because well, it always did, but it didn't have great power, and that was true in general. The Calm Mind plus Soft Boiled and Calm Mind plus Taunt sets were most definitely too strong for overuse, but in Uber's Mewtwo did them way better. It's not even like Soft Boiled was unique in any other way other than the cuteness factor of Mew eating an egg, since Mewtwo had recovery. And really, that was just true of the special attacking sets in general. Mewtwo did it better. Mewtwo could even afford to go Shadow Ball over Bolt Beam for better Uber's coverage. Even attempts at a mixed set fell to Mewtwo, who just had better attacking stats overall. So Mew could run a Sub Punch and Bolt Beam set to potentially mess up Blissey, Snorlax, and Regice, but really if you were doing that, you better have a Mewtwo doing something else. So now was the time that Mew really did have to put that devious little mind to use. Base 100 stats were not as hot as they once were, especially with the typing of Pure Psychic, so it was versatility or bust. The first way this manifested was still in Swords Dance, something Mew still had over Mewtwo. Earthquake and Shadow Ball provided good coverage against many Uber threats. And in its last slot, Mew had the option of going with a signature Soft Boil, Taunt, or Explosion, which was something Mewtwo didn't technically have. Choice Band sets aimed to make use of that small difference by packing in an incredibly strong Explosion alongside Mew's trademark perfect coverage, but this set also found itself faltering because of Mew's mediocre stats. More successful Mew sets focused on its support move pool, which was now finally wide enough to be of real use. One of Mew's few advantages over Mewtwo was its better overall defenses, and so it makes sense that's where it would find its niche. A defensive toxic Mew with, what else, Soft Boiled, could be very hard to take down. Interestingly enough, this Mew ran Snatch, which let it guaranteed beat Blissey by snatching Aromatherapy or other support moves. The other reason Mew did this better than Mewtwo was its ability, Synchronize, which let it go up against enemy statusers a lot more courageously. Finally, Mew's offenses were still good enough for it to slap one offensive move on there, and for what it was anyone's guess really. Mew's move pool also meant it had access to sleep, so a Hypnosis Calm Mind set was perfectly possible. This set wasn't necessarily good per se, but it was something Mewtwo couldn't do, and that mattered a lot. Hypnosis Transform was also a potential combo, and actually really fun to play. Get something to sleep, put up screens to guarantee you win the matchup, and then transform and wreak havoc. Playing into Mew's other options was really the only way to play it, so you could see Fake Out, Substitute Torment, and even Roar show up. There is no singular Pokemon that beat every Mew set, but once you figured out what it was doing, it was far easier to neuter it. Metagross was a particularly strong pick though, since it resisted attacking moves Mew went with except for Thunderbolt, and had the defenses to easily take an Earthquake. It's not that Mew's normal sets like Calm Mind were bad per se, they were just hopelessly outclassed that they were only seen if Mewtwo was doing something else, which it frequently wasn't. Mew was Uber's, but certainly didn't have a huge impact in the metagame. It just would have tormented overused to no end. Luckily for Mew, Game Freak saw it fit to give it some love by expanding the moves it learns naturally as well, upgrading its old 6-move level up list to extend all the way to level 100, and giving it a very important addition in the process in Baton Pass. With nearly every boosting move in the game to its name, Mew could now act out its own line of ancestry, passing on stat boosts just as it had passed its own genetic material. Mew was inarguably the best Baton Passer in the game for its ability to pass +2 in every stat in addition to Calm Mind or Bulk Up, and you had no idea which you were facing until it clicked that move. By far the most common combo though was Rock Polish and either Nasty Plot or Swords Dance, giving the sweeper of your choice a deadly stat boost that could end the game. With Taunt and its good defenses, Mew easily found chances to set up on defensive Pokemon like Fortress and Wobbuffet. Lumberry was just the last line of backup to make sure you got off all your boosts, and hopefully won the game. By Generation 4, everyone had pretty much given up the ghost in terms of attacking Mew. It was clear it just wasn't gonna cut it as is. Every other type of Mew though was a viable strategy. Lead Mew with its potent combination of Taunt and Stealth Rock, Explosion, and U-Turn had the tools to beat every common Uber's lead with good prediction and frequently come out ahead. Transform Mew grew even more potent due to the ability to trick a Choice Scarf onto your unwitting victim before transforming, giving you a huge advantage, especially if you had screens up. And finally, Mew could potentially fashion itself into the most annoying Pokemon ever through mix and matching every accessible status with Hypnosis, Thunder Wave, Will-O-Wisp, Toxic, take your pick, and proceed to torment your opponent as you healed yourself and ran away. In terms of other options, of course you could run any other boosting move you wanted with Baton Pass, or even fish for a Silver Wind boost if you're that kind of player. Knockoff was an eminently useful move and could be used as a pseudo status move, and Baton Pass users could attempt to threaten as sweepers themselves with Mew's huge move pool. This mode of Mew would run some combo of Ice Punch, EQ, and Brick Break on the physical side, and Ice Beam, Grass Knot, Aura Sphere, Thunder, and Dark Pulse on the special side. And I'm sure you're tired of me saying there aren't any counters, especially after a whole Mewtwo video, so I'll just get into what did work. Metagross has always benefited from not being afraid of whatever piddly move Mew threw at it. While Tyranitar only feared Brick Break, Mewtwo continued to exert dominance with its faster speed, meaning it could get a taunt off and then just win. Other sets were mostly set specific. While Lead Mew could beat any other lead, ample prediction was required against fast leads like Darkrai or the fast Deoxys forms. Transform Mew was hampered by a Pokemon who couldn't be tricked or already had choice items. Giratina Origin in particular gave it problems. If you tried to pop off this set too early, you were likely to lose Mew and a lot of momentum. Other good counters were the uncommon Weavile, who outsped and had a stab pursuit, and Deoxys attack, although the 20 defense monster understandably couldn't switch into much. The best quote-unquote counter to Mew was probably taunting in general, since its sets now almost invariably relied on support moves. But if it got a rock polish off, it would then outspeed almost everything. Baton Pass, Rock Polish, and Stealth Rock ended up helping out Mew incredibly. It still wasn't as high as others in the Ubers metagame, but it was certainly better than its sorry state in Gen 3. Gen 5 had plenty of nerfs in store for Mew. However, an explosion nerf meant that its big red button had suddenly been removed from its control panel, while the addition of Dragon Tail as a phasing move that couldn't be taunted meant that Mew struggled to pull off its lengthy setup chains. Weather-centric meta was also a harsh environment for a Pokemon that didn't use weather much at all. In fact, Mew's fall from grace was such that it officially landed in underuse, although by the end of Black and White 2, it had reached a play rate high enough that would have made it overused. So we'll be focusing on overuse here, as we usually do. Support Mew was still the pesky little bugger it was in generations past, with the combination of Taunt, Will-O-Wisp, and Soft Boiled, making it incredibly hard for any physical attacker to break through. This set was played as a physical tank with huge momentum, gaining potential due to its ability to stymie Garchomp, Dragonite, and Landorus Therian with Ice Beam. If you feared substitute users, Psychic would break through easier, but physical attackers in general feared getting burned a whole lot, while Taunt ended any hopes of slower stall Pokemon. Lead Mew was still just as effective as before, and had adapted its tricks to a metagame without Team Preview, where beating any number of Pokemon was important. Tailwind and Magikarp were the two big changes here. If you had Stealth Rocks and Tailwind up on an opponent, you could easily translate that into a huge advantage and win the game, and Magic Coat could potentially make the opponent tear out their hair in frustration, though Taunt was usually the better choice. With Normal Gem, Explosion made for a fireworks finish that almost reached its old power. Baton Pass was still viable as well, though it faced the same problems with Dragon Tail that Mew did in Ubers. What's more, Prankster introduced a whole new subset of Pokemon that could destroy the strategy, and Gen 5's huge power jump meant the Pokemon that could simply stop the set by hitting it hard was way up, making dual screen support nearly mandatory to pull off. Finally, Mew's banishment to the lower tiers did mean it was able to potentially run attacking sets again, namely Nasty Plot, which benefited from the addition of Psyshock to let Mew hit special tanks as well. Psyshock, Aura Sphere, and either Fire Blast or Dark Pulse let Mew beat out threats like Tyranitar, other Psychic types, and potentially Steel types who are neutral to fighting attacks. But that last slot was the kicker. Throw anything you want on there, because if you're not using Mew's unpredictability, what's the point? Despite lower stats, Mew was still perfectly capable of one-hit KOing threats like Landorus T, Tyranitar, Hippowdon, Jirachi, and Celebi. The fact that Mew could run an attacking set was more important than it might seem. It meant that if you read the Mew set wrong, the potential loss was much higher than when it just went support moves every game. If you guessed Sweeper and got burned, that wasn't good. If you guessed support and got set up on, that might be worse. Counters were mostly chosen for their ability to beat common sets, as countering every possible Mew set is, as we know, impossible. But entry into a new metagame meant new Pokemon that attempted to do so. Pokemon that hit Mew hard on the special side were the best solutions to support sets, which relied on Will-O-Wisp. The Laddies were both well suited to this role, and Thundurus T packed so much power it could even use Mew as setup bait. Specifically, defensive Mew variants did exist, but they still lost to certain Pokemon such as Hydreigon or powerful range sweepers who could muscle through. Heatran was easily the best solution. Immunity to Will-O-Wisp, a Psychic Resist, and high special attack all combined for a convincing threat as long as Earthquake wasn't involved. The lead set lost similarly to Heatran, and Tyranitar's ability to break Focus Sash and then KO was very valuable. Baton Pass sets relied heavily on dual screens, so stopping that was key, because if you didn't, Mew's 100 stats bulk meant the pass was coming. Either kill this dual screens user or find a way to stop Mew in the 3 turns it needed to set up due to its need to use both Rock Polish and another boosting move. At least Game Freak had the foresight not to give it Shell Smash. Finally, Nasty Plot Mew. While the best option was probably a revenge killer or something that was just fast enough to kill it in general, even Mew's coverage doesn't solve every problem. Remember, Mew was technically underused, and I'll not say much other than that it was very good in underuse, because its stats were actually amazing there, and its ability to pull off even more sweeping sets was exponentially useful. Gen 5 may have been a weak outing from Mew, but it was still a big threat. The biggest thing about Mew was the fear it might strike into your opponent for not knowing what it was gonna do, because everyone knows Mew gets everything. Now it's time to face facts. Mew isn't Uber anymore, and it wasn't last gen, but at least it can make it back into overuse. Without weather, Mew's bulk was a lot more impressive. No more eating boosted Hydro Pumps. Its Will-O-Wisp support set stayed extremely strong. It even got a boost in the form of the powered up knockoff. This Mew was, as always, extremely annoying for enemy physical attackers, but by pivoting to special defense investment, it was also one of the best stall breakers thanks to its own access to recovery, taunt, and residual damage, and knockoff wasn't half bad either in that role. Synchronize, which had been a huge boon to Mew since Gen 3, was especially useful in this position, since it prevented enemy Pokemon from setting up with status unless they were immune to it. The real niche for Mew, however, was as the only relevant defogger, with both Will-O-Wisp and no weakness to Stealth Rock. This was hugely important. Defog, of course, had only just come into vogue as a result of its new hazard removal property, but the best way to counter that was to switch in a Defiant user like Bisharp. Mew's ability to burn those Defiant users took the counterplay one step further. If concern about Defiant wasn't too high, Mew could of course run Taunt. The last two moves were reserved for an attack, and of course Mew's Egg. Gotta have the egg. Mew's Baton Pass set was additionally still relevant up until Baton Pass was completely neutered by Smogon. Check out our Smeargle, Espeon, or Vaporeon vids for that info. It was never amazing anyways, because Scolipede and Celebi did the job better for the most part. Offensive sets were, as always, possible but not common, and the lead set had fallen out of vogue in competition with Azo. Counters were still situational, but the best counters were still special attackers and fire types who didn't care about Will-O-Wisp, and pursuit trappers who forced Mew into an uncomfortable situation, although Will-O-Wisp was frequently a problem for those as well. This was true of many of Mew's would-be counters, such as Mega Scizor and Weavile, and was the reason it was such a powerful physical tank. The moves that hit it super effectively frequently came from the side it could cripple. Mew still wasn't a dominant force, but its presence in the metagame was one to be prepared for. Finally, present day. The defensive set is extremely variable, with the one staple being that sweet soft-boiled egg. Ice Beam is necessary for Zygarde and Landorus, but Psychic hits fighting and poison types hard. Will-O-Wisp still handles physical attackers well, but Earthquake beats Heatran and Magearna. Defog or Stealth Rock depends on whether you want to set up hazards or get rid of them. And any combo of these moves, including old versions like the standard physical tank with Taunt, are viable, but harder to justify given the need to hit threats like Zygarde. Mew's bulk is nothing to laugh at, and coming in on a Pokemon like Zapdos and hitting it with Ice Beam is a valuable role. It also makes a great Mega Metacham check. Offensive Mew, however, got an incredible boost with Genesis Supernova, Mew's exclusive Z move. Genesis Supernova upgrades Psychic to a base 185 power move, which sets up Psychic terrain, letting Mew be safe for priority and making Psychic disgustingly powerful in its own right. Mew would fire that off to remove a threat, then attempt to boost with Nasty Plot or Rock Polish, making it a powerful sweeper. This set's potential lies in its synergy with Mew's common defensive set. An opponent likely won't switch in something that could beat offensive Mew with the predicted Will-O-Wisp, giving Mew time to set up and take over the game. Fire Blast is important to hit steel types like Ferrothorn, Mega Scizor, Magearna, but leaves Mew walled by T-Tar and Greninja, so Aura Sphere is used for those. The biggest counter is Mega Latias, who will beat it pretty much always without ample setup. Mew's compression into two sets is partially due to Z moves, which makes achieving the time it needs to set up annoying elaborate support sets much harder. As such, Taunt and Knockoff are a bit less common, meaning that in addition to the Dark and Fire types that usually beat Mew, setup sweepers can potentially beat it, unless Munium Z is there, which is really scary. Ghost types like Gengar and Alolan Marowak that don't care about a burn do very well against the defensive variations with their super effective attacks. Mew stayed right about where it was before, easily adapting to Z moves and overuse with one of its own. And that's it. So how good was Mew actually? Well, it was really good. Don't get me wrong, Ubers for 4 generations isn't anything to scoff at, but you can't help but feel that Mew has gotten a tad worse. It started out like Mewtwo, uncounterable, but for a different reason. While Mewtwo has a potent offensive move pool and stats that mean it can do whatever it wants, Mew's unlimited move pool was steadily becoming a less and less attractive trait. It's no surprise it moved into the support space. In addition to power creep, the amount of Pokemon that get literally every support move is a lot smaller than Pokemon that can just sweep well. But here's the thing, every set that we named will always have the potential to be completely different. I hope that in due time, that trait becomes as valuable as it once was again. Thanks for watching everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to Full Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content, and as I always say, comment on what Pokemon you want to see next. Also, thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And follow my crew on the social media platforms, yada yada yada. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.